HOA tried to shut down my barbecue area, but it was fully permitted while their pool wasn't. James Culver's voice boomed across the air, echoing off the pristine, cookie-cutter houses lined up like obedient soldiers. He was red-faced, his HOA badge gleaming under the midday sun like a sheriff's star. He wanted a fight. I stepped forward, arms crossed. Fine by me. No, James. What's bullshit is you thinking you can bully people into doing whatever you want. My barbecue setup is legal, permitted, inspected. It's not going anywhere. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, neighbors stepping onto porches, pretending to check their mail, but watching the fireworks. The HOA meetings were usually dull, but today, this was a bloodbath in broad daylight. James snatched the violation notice from his clipboard, jabbing a finger at me. This neighborhood has standards. And you, coming in here and building your little, he flailed, struggling for an insult. Smoky, grease-covered monstrosity. Don't interrupt me. Spit flew from his mouth. He thrust the paper at my chest, so hard it crumpled. You have 2 weeks to rip that shit down, or I'll start racking up fines so fast your head will spin. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Then you're going to have a hell of a time explaining that to the city. That hit its mark. His eyes flickered. Doubt. I leaned in. Time to twist the knife. See, James, unlike your little pet projects, my barbecue area is fully permitted. Every tile, every brick, every damn inch approved. This means if you keep harassing me, we both know who's going to come out on top. James opened his mouth and then shut it. A few of the watching neighbors whispered among themselves, their loyalty shifting. Then, from behind James, a new voice cut through the tension. Oh, for fuck's sake, James, just admit you lost. Carolyn Whitmore, HOA treasurer. One of James' cronies, until now. James whirled on her. Stay out of this, Carolyn. She snorted. No, because I checked the permits myself this morning. He's right, James. Silence. James's jaw clenched. But then he recovered. His face twisted into an ugly sneer. Fine. We'll see how long you last in this neighborhood, smartass. Then he stormed off. And I knew this wasn't over. That night, I sat on my patio, nursing a cold beer. The barbecue area looked damn beautiful under the backyard lights. Built to last. And yet, James wasn't the type to walk away quietly. A text pinged on my phone. You're making enemies. Be careful, asterisk. I smirked. Oh, I knew. But James had just made one too. Got it. We're keeping the fire burning. This is a trade-up battle, and James isn't backing down. But neither am I. I woke up to the sound of metal on metal. It was 6:42 a.m. Way too early for anyone sane to be making that kind of noise. But this was an HOA neighborhood, and sane, had left the building the second James Culver decided I was his new favorite target. I threw on a hoodie and stepped outside. And there he was. James, standing in my driveway, arms crossed, smirking like the devil, just whispered a dirty joke in his ear. 2 HOA goons, his loyal lackeys, were zip-tying a violation sign onto my mailbox. Are you out of your goddamn mind? I barked. James spread his hands like he was some kind of diplomatic saint. Just doing my duty. This neighborhood can't tolerate people breaking the rules. I stalked up to him, yanking the sign free. What rule? Name one. James's smirk faltered. Then, he pulled a stack of papers from his clipboard, flipping to a highlighted section. Section 14, subsection B. Permanent outdoor fixtures must be in harmony with community aesthetics. I laughed. Out loud. Right in his face. That's not even a real rule. That's some bullshit, we don't like you clause. His eyes narrowed. You can appeal it. At the next HOA meeting, I tore the sign in half and dropped it at his feet. Go fuck yourself, James. The neighbors watched from their porches. Some with coffee cups, some pretending they weren't enjoying the show. But nobody spoke up. And James, he just smiled. Like he had a backup plan. The next 2 weeks were hell. It started with fines. Bullshit. Every single one. I contested them all, but James was stacking the deck. The HOA board was loaded with his people. The votes were rigged before I even walked into the room. Then came the mysterious concerns from neighbors. By the end of the second week, letters were showing up in my mailbox. I'd seen this tactic before. Push someone until they break. Make them feel unwelcome. But James had no idea who he was fucking with. Are you sure about this? Carolyn stood in my backyard, arms crossed. She was nervous. She had every right to be. I tapped the thick manila folder on the table. Absolutely. Inside, every shady HOA deal James had ever made. The HOA's prize community pool. The one James loved parading around at every meeting. Built illegally. Expanded without permits. And the health inspections? Non-existent. One phone call. That's all it would take. And James's empire would crumble. Carolyn leaned in, lowering her voice. You go after the pool. You're going after the heart of this HOA. The board will protect him. I smiled. They can try. She sighed, rubbing her temples. You think this is worth it? I looked out at my backyard. At my goddamn barbecue area. The one I built legally. The one James was so desperate to tear down. He made it worth it. The next morning, I got a visit from a city inspector. She was polite, professional, but apologetic. We received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property. I almost laughed in her face. Yeah, and who sent it? She glanced at her clipboard, then hesitated. That was all I needed. James Culver. She didn't deny it. Didn't have to. I waved her toward the barbecue area. Go ahead. Check everything. She did. Measured. Took notes. Even snapped a few pictures. And when she was done, she closed her notebook and shrugged. Everything looks in order. I smiled. Would you mind writing that up? Maybe on official letterhead. She nodded. And just like that, James's little stunt backfired. But he wasn't done. That night, Carolyn called. They're turning on him. I sat up. Who? The board. Half of them don't want to go down with him. There's a meeting tomorrow night. Open floor. They're going to bring up the pool. I grinned. Perfect. Because I wouldn't just be bringing up the pool. I'd be dropping the goddamn hammer. The next night, I walked into the HOA meeting like I owned the place. James sat at the head of the table, trying to look confident. But the board members around him? Shifty. Uncomfortable. They knew. The meeting started with the usual bullshit agenda. Financials. Event planning. Then violations. James cleared his throat. Next item, unauthorized structures. Specifically, I cut him off. I'd like to bring up a different structure. The pool. Silence. James froze. The board members glanced at each other. I pulled out the folder. Held it up. I think we should talk about the fact that it was built without permits. Murmurs. Shuffling. James forced a laugh. That's ridiculous. I flipped open the first page. Inspection records. Missing. Second page. Expansion blueprints. Never filed. Third page. A formal complaint was filed this morning. With the city. I leaned forward. James, what happens when a non-compliant pool fails an inspection? Silence. I turned to the board. Shut down. Immediately. James's face turned to stone. And I knew this was checkmate. Got it. We're keeping this as a full-blown war. And now, James is fighting for survival. Let's ramp up the pressure and tear his empire apart. James was a cornered animal, and I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. The morning after I dropped the pool bombshell at the HOA meeting, I woke up to another violation notice zip-tied to my mailbox. This time, not just one, and the best one. Failure to comply with HOA decorum, $1,000 fine. I had to laugh. Decorum? The same guy who had just been exposed in front of his board was talking about decorum? I grabbed my phone and dialed Carolyn. He's panicking, she said before I even spoke. I just got off a call with the city. The inspectors are already looking into the pool. I grinned. Good. Let him drown. James was losing control. And he knew it. Over the next few days, you could feel the shift in the air. Neighbors who used to ignore me nodded in quiet approval when I walked by. But not everyone was ready to jump ship. Some people, mostly the ones who got James special treatment, clung to him like rats on a sinking ship. Case in point, the neighborhood Facebook page. I, for one, think James has done a great job keeping our community safe from riffraff. It's a shame when troublemakers move in and think they can change our rules. Maybe if people didn't pick fights with the HOA, they wouldn't have so many problems. Oh, Mark. Sweet, spineless Mark. But what sealed it? The email. An anonymous message was sent to all HOA members. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Because someone, not me, had compiled everything James had done over the years. And at the bottom, a scanned copy of the city's official inquiry into the pool. James was bleeding out, and the sharks were starting to circle. I should have expected it. When a man like James is losing everything, he does the only thing he knows how. He tries to burn it all down. It started with phone call. I was in my backyard, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of watching my completely legal barbecue area stand tall when my phone buzzed. I answered. James, you smug little shit. I laughed. James, buddy, you sound stressed. You think this is over. He snarled. You think just because you threw some paperwork at me you won? I took a slow sip of my beer. No, I think I won because the city's shutting down your pool next week. Silence. And then his voice dropped to something darker. You don't know who you're fucking with. I sat up. Now this was interesting. I built this neighborhood. He hissed. You're just a goddamn parasite. You come in here, you challenge me, and you think you're gonna win? I'll bury you. I'll make sure you're drowning in so many fines, so many legal fees. You'll wish you never moved in. I smirked. That a threat, James? No, he said, voice dripping with venom. That's a fucking promise. Click. I stared at my phone. Then, I hit record. Because James had just made the just mistake of his life. I walked into the next HOA meeting like I was stepping into a goddamn boxing ring. James sat at the table, looking like a clinging to the last threads of his power. His suit was wrinkled. His face was pale, drawn. The board members? Uneasy. And the residents? Oh, they were ready for blood. I took my seat, leaned back, and tapped my phone's record button. Before we start, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, I'd like to share something with the community. I hit play. James's voice filled the room. You think just because you threw some paperwork at me you won? I'll bury you. That's a fucking promise. Dead. Silence. James went pale. Neighbors whispered. Some gasped. Carolyn leaned forward, barely hiding her grin. Mr. Culver, she said, savoring the moment, would you like to explain yourself? James tooted. His chair scraped back violently. This is out of context. Sounds pretty clear to me, I cut in. Threats, intimidation, abuse of power, and let's not forget, I slid the city's official notice across the table. The pool. I said, loud enough for the whole room. Yeah, that's officially shut down, pending further inspection. Turns out that when you break the law, there are consequences. James snatched the paper, eyes darting over the text. Neighbors started murmuring louder. Then the final blow. Carolyn stood. I moved to call a vote. James froze. A vote for what? He snapped. She smiled. A vote to remove you as HOA president. And just like that, James Culver's reign was over. James looked around the room, his face a perfect shade of, oh fuck. He wasn't just losing control. He was being publicly executed. Carolyn stood tall, hands planted on the table. All those in favor of removing James Culver as HOA president, raise your hand. A wave of hands shot up. No hesitation, not even from his usual lackeys. James's eyes darted from face to face, searching for allies. Mark, hand up. Karen from Lot 43, hand up. Even his own vice president raised his goddamn hand. It was a mutiny. You backstabbing cowards. James hissed, slamming his fists on the table. After everything I did for this neighborhood. Enough. Carolyn cut him off like a guillotine. You're out, James. The final count. Unanimous. The man who had ruled this neighborhood like a tin pot dictator for years had just been flushed like a cheap goldfish. James stood slowly, shaking with rage. You think this is over? He spat. You think you can just vote me out? Carolyn crossed her arms. That's exactly what we just did. A few people logged. James. He wasn't laughing. He snatched up his papers, his hands trembling. This is a goddamn circus. I leaned back, arms folded. No, James. It's democracy. I watched him see it. Cornered. Exposed. Defeated. And then, he snapped. James whipped around, finger jabbing the air at me. You did this. You ruined everything. I grinned. Nah, James. You did this to yourself. James stormed toward me, his composure completely gone. You smug little piece of shit. I stood up. Slowly. I didn't say a word. Didn't have to. The room had already turned against him. That's when the doors opened, and in walked two city officials. The room went dead silent. One of them, a tall woman in a navy blue suit, scanned the crowd and cleared her throat. James Culver? James froze. His hand twitched. He looked ready to run. We're in the middle of a meeting. Not anymore. She pulled out a stack of official documents. The city seals. Legalese. The works. As of today, the city is formally issuing citations against you and the HOA for unauthorized construction and violation of zoning laws. The room exploded. James's face drained of color. I could barely hear over the chaos. Neighbors shouting, Carolyn trying and failing to hide her smile, people pulling out their phones to record the meltdown. No, this is bullshit. James lammed his hands on the table. This is my neighborhood. Not anymore. The city rep set down the initial piece of paper. A court summons. I smiled. Have a great evening, James. And just like that, game over. James left the HOA meeting in disgrace. His wife refused to meet his eyes. His loyalists scattered like roaches. And the next morning, the pool was shut down. Bright yellow, condemned, tape stretched across the entrance. The HOA's Rise community landmark, now a monument to James's failure. And the best part, James was officially under investigation for the misuse of funds. The news spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, I'd seen powerful men fall before, but watching James lose everything. That was art. A week later, I stood in my perfectly legal barbecue area grilling teaks, drinking a cold beer, and enjoying the silence. Then Carolyn walked in. She raised an eyebrow. So, how does it feel to be the most hated man in the neighborhood? I grinned. Oh, I think James still holds that title. She smirked. Fair. I flipped a steak. So what happens now? Carolyn shrugged. We rebuild. The HOA is voting in new leadership. More transparency. No more power-hungry assholes running things. I nodded. Then she grinned. Oh, and one more thing. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. She pulled out an envelope. I opened it. Inside, an official letter. From the new HOA board. I laughed. I'd been offered a board seat. You've got to be kidding me. Carolyn sipped her wine. What can I say? We need someone who follows the rules. I looked at my backyard. At the barbecue area, James swore he'd tear down. Still standing. Just like me. I grinned. Fine. But I'm bringing my beer to the meetings. She laughed. Deal. And just like that, the neighborhood was finally free. James Culver was gone. Not in the moved away quietly way. Oh no. The man had crashed and burned so spectacularly that the whole neighborhood was still talking about it weeks later. His house. Sold. His HOA legacy. Ashes. The last time anyone saw him, he was loading boxes into a moving truck at 6 a.m., trying to get out before anyone could witness his humiliation. But of course, this was an HOA community. Someone was always watching. Carolyn sent me a picture after that morning. James, red-faced, sweat-stained, stuffing garbage bags into the back of his car. Her caption? Ding dong, the dick is gone. I nearly choked on my coffee laughing. But the real kicker? The HOA finds James had been slinging at everyone for years. They arranged right back at him. And the neighbors? They celebrated. The night after James officially left, people threw a block party. No permits. No approvals. No HOA bullshit. Just good food, good beer, and the entire neighborhood laughing about the downfall of a dictator. A month later, I was standing in my backyard, grilling up steaks on the same barbecue setup James swore he'd tear down. Carolyn leaned against the patio railing, sipping a beer. Never thought I'd say this, she mused, but the HOA meetings are actually peaceful now. I smirked. No screaming matches. No decorum violations. She laughed. Nope. Just people being reasonable. What a concept. After James got booted, the HOA underwent a total overhaul. Hell, even some of James's old cronies came around. Mark, the same guy who defended James online, came up to me last week at the store. Hey man, I guess I was wrong about you. I shrugged. Happens. But the biggest surprise? They voted me onto the HOA board. I nearly choked when Carolyn handed me the letter. I don't do politics, I told her. She grinned. Good. That's exactly why we need you. And just like that, I was part of the thing I swore I'd never join. But this time, we were playing by real rules. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed. But one thing never did. James's downfall became neighborhood legend. Every new family that moved in, they heard about it. A random kid from down the street knocked on my door one afternoon. Hey, mister, my dad says you took down the worst HOA president ever. I grinned. Something like that. He auded seriously. You're cool. Then he ran off. Damn right I'm cool. But more importantly, the neighborhood was finally free. And it all started because one asshole picked the wrong fight.